I am Ken White. I serve as the lead pastor of Forest Park Covenant Church. I'm here with Garth McGrath, who is the district superintendent of the Great Lakes Conference. Is that right, Garth? Is that
you
the
got
right?
that right,
Yeah.
Ken. Thanks.
So this is our podcast, which we call On Mission, and we like to have the opportunity to speak with various people, both locally and regionally, and I think I would call you a national leader, actually. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things we like to do is just to get to know the person who is sitting in your chair. So the first thing I'd like to ask you, Garth, is if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about how you got involved in ministry.
Yeah, happy to do that, Ken. Thanks. And thanks for the invitation to be here with you today. I really appreciate your ministry and this church, and grateful for the opportunity to share and reflect a little bit on what's going on in the world of ministry today. So my journey started back when I was a youth. Left the church when I was 18 years old and made my way into atheism, and then through a journey of reading scripture, found my way back into the faith. And so when I was in college, became a follower of Jesus, and after graduation from college, landed a position, my first career, which was in higher education in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I was the director of public safety at Aquinas College.
Yeah.
And spent 2 years there. Meanwhile, volunteered with Young Life Ministry, and it was while I was teaching kids about the scriptures that I realized I needed to learn more about the Bible if I was going to be teaching it to young people. And so I needed a higher, an advanced degree in some field in order to go on in higher education, and I needed an education in the Bible, so I did what anybody would do. I went to seminary.
Yeah, right.
And landed at Fuller Theological Seminary out in California.
Yeah.
And it was there that I came into the Evangelical Covenant Church, became part of the Pasadena Covenant Church family. And so I was a student at Fuller, did an internship at Pasadena Covenant Church, and while I was there, two pastors spoke profoundly into my life, John Bray and Wayne Carlson. Said that while I would make a fine college president someday, what I was really gifted for was to be a pastor. And so they asked if they could help me find a church to serve in.
When they said that to you, that they thought you would be gifted to be a pastor, what were they looking at?
Well, I had done an internship that was required of my education, right, at Fuller. And so I think they were just seeing me in action in ministry with students.
Right.
I was serving as a youth pastor under a lead youth pastor, Charlie Barker. And so they saw me in action. They had given me an opportunity to preach during my internship. It was the Sunday after Christmas, between Christmas and New Year, that was supposed to be the least attended Sunday of the year.
Yeah.
And so I preached that morning a sermon on Hosea. I can remember it to this day. I was terrified, but apparently they saw something in me at that point that told them that I could be fruitful in ministry. And so they contacted the pastor of a church in Modesto, California, whose name also happened to be Garth Bolander.
Okay.
Garth called me and said, "Hey, we're looking for a youth pastor. John Bray and Wayne Carlson have recommended you to us. We'd like to have a conversation. Would you be willing?" And I had an interview with Garth that led to an interview with the search committee, and that ended up being my first call in ministry.
Yeah.
Served Modesto, California for 5 years.
As a youth pastor?
As a youth pastor.
And then you were, I think, a youth pastor. You were sharing with our staff this morning, a youth pastor for another 9 years, right?
So, then I was called to Thornapple Covenant Church in Grand Rapids,
right,
where I served for 9 years, and then was contacted by a search committee of a small church in New England that was looking for a lead pastor, and ended up being called to serve as the lead pastor of Monadnock Covenant Church in Keene, New Hampshire for 14 years. And then 9 years ago, the conference leadership here contacted me to see if I'd be willing to come and serve as the superintendent of the Great Lakes Conference. And
I just want to ask this question. So you were a youth pastor, you were a lead pastor.
So associate for 9 years.
Associate,
yeah.
Okay. And then you were
mm-hmm.
a lead pastor, then you
Right.
were a district superintendent. So what did you like doing in each one of those? So start with youth pastor. What did you like as being a youth pastor? Can you remember that way back then?
Oh, sure. Well, I've always had a passion to reach people who don't know Jesus and give them an opportunity to meet him.
Yeah.
And then see what God does through that. And so watching people have encounters with Jesus and come into a relationship with God through faith in Jesus has been the most compelling part of my ministry experience. I have had the privilege of seeing lives change. And I'm not a gifted evangelist.
Yes.
It's just that I feel called and compelled to share my faith with people, to give them the opportunity to have this encounter with Jesus that is life transforming. And I mean, it is my life. My relationship with God is who I am.
Yeah.
And so being able to share that with people and watch God work on their hearts and draw them into relationship with him, that's been the driving force and the thing that I have found the most compelling about being in ministry all these years.
And was that the same thing that you enjoyed most, being an associate and also lead pastor?
All the way through.
Yeah. So
even as superintendent.
Oh, even as superintendent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what the follow-up question is, what are the challenges in each one of those that you felt? The youth pastor, the associate pastor, the lead pastor, district superintendent. So let's start with the youth pastor. What do you think is a challenge for being a youth pastor? For you too.
Well, for me in youth ministry, it was always feeling like I was a fish out of water. Like there were other people who were really naturally gifted, kind of the Pied Piper leader, and kids were drawn to them. And I never felt that way. I felt called to do the work. I didn't think I was particularly suited for it the way that I thought other people were. Nevertheless, God used me, and we saw, significant things happen in Modesto. And I was in my associate role at Thornapple for the first 5 years I was there. I was also the youth pastor, so I had a dual role of associate with adult ministries and youth pastor with youth ministries. And youth ministry, I always kind of felt like a fish out of water, but God seemed to be showing up and doing good work in and through. So that was challenging. When I was in my associate role at Thornapple, focused eventually more on adult ministries, the challenge there for me was that I was starting to preach more, and it was a church that had a number of Bible scholars in it, and I always felt intimidated by the Bible scholars in the community.
Yeah.
So that was very challenging for me to overcome that sense of inadequacy or lack, and so stepping forward on faith and trying to use my gifts to the best of my ability, and then trusting God to do the rest. It was always a challenge, and a great privilege, as you know. And then in my lead role as pastor of Monadnock Covenant Church, I think the biggest challenge for me in that environment was the constant pressure of having to preach well, consistently, week in and week out. I was anxious about committing to doing that when I was trying to decide whether to leave Thornapple Church to go to Monadnock. To think about preaching week in and week out, year after year, that was intimidating to me.
How did it turn out? Did you find that you got into a groove and you started to enjoy it, or was it always a challenge?
I would say it was always a challenge.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was affirmed in my preaching. People expressed appreciation for it. Again, I never felt like I was that gifted preacher. I was just committed to it, and this is what God called me to, so that's what I did, and I tried to be faithful. But I spent a lot of time preparing to preach.
Yeah.
I probably worked on average about 20 to 25 hours a week on developing a message that I felt could be useful.
Yeah. And then just to sort of piggyback to the next level, which is the district superintendent, which the role you're in right now. What do you find is the biggest challenge for that?
Kind of a theme here. Who am I to serve in that role?
Right.
Because it's a tremendous privilege and responsibility. And as I looked at other superintendents and knowing the gifts and capacities that they had, it wasn't clear to me why I was being asked to put my name in the hat, but I was being asked. And so I did it out of love for the church and a willingness to serve if called, but with no expectation. And then when they asked me to serve in the role, it took me about a year and a half to realize that the gifts that I have were appropriate to the needs of the conference at the time. And a lot of that had to do with pastoral care of pastors, leaning into the care of pastors and the care of lay leaders in our churches, because the role of the superintendent is to be a pastor to the pastors, but also the shepherd of the mission of the conference. And so actually, in my role, my first obligation is to care for the churches of the conference. And I do that by caring well for our pastors and providing resources for our pastors. But the primary responsibility is the care of churches, so that the churches can carry on their mission ongoing. So it's this dual responsibility of caring both for the institution, the church, and for the clergy who serve the church.
Well, then I think that's a real challenge for many denominations, because they have a similar structure. But the thing that the covenant has, I was mainly a pastor not in the covenant for most of my life, is that they have an ordered ministry. And whether the ordered ministry is perfect or not, I mean, what kind of system is, it does have this facet of caring for pastors in more than a kind of a lip service fashion. And that means both caring for pastors to encourage them and help them, and also to hold them accountable when maybe they're not doing the thing that they need to be doing. Right. And I imagine that you're on both sides of that. And maybe there are other sides too.
Well, I am involved on both sides of that, and I do love the covenant's commitment to their clergy. We have a rigorous credentialing process and then an oversight structure that includes the superintendent at the conference level in partnership with the Committee on Ministerial Standing. So that's primarily for the credentialing process, so that someone who is seeking a credential with the covenant is accountable at that level. And then if there is need for discipline or care, that falls largely on the shoulders of the superintendent of the conference, and then the board of the ordered ministry and the department of the ordered ministry, which we now call develop leaders, is that whole area of the domain of the ordered ministry.
Yeah. So this is a similar question for both your caring for churches and caring for pastors. So let's start with pastors. What are the things that you see as really being important to try to address with pastors, like to ask them to help them to be healthy pastors? Here are some things you should do. Here's some things that we need to think about. What are you seeing pastors really struggling with is another way of looking at that. So.
Well, in this season of COVID and with political polarization that we've observed over the last 5 years, 6 years, and the heightened tensions around matters of race, the need for pastors to care well for themselves and for their families, I think, is greater than ever before with the kinds of pressures that we're all experiencing, the exhaustion from living through the COVID experience of, a year and a half ago, having to adapt to all new realities, and increase our capacity for ministry through online tools. I mean, it's just been monumentally challenging. And so in the midst of their exhaustion and the tensions in our culture, that has seeped into the local church. Now more than ever, I'm inviting pastors and encouraging pastors to care well for themselves and for their families while still fulfilling their responsibilities to the local church. And it's almost an impossible task because it's so demanding. You got to care for yourself, and you got to care well for your church. And so in this season, we've tried to come alongside them by encouraging them to connect with their colleagues. And we do that at the cluster level with groups of pastors in a geographic region, connecting with each other and caring for each other mutually at that level. Encouraging them to take advantage of pastor getaways that we've made available to our clergy at our camps, to participate in the upcoming pastors retreat that we have scheduled, and then to go to midwinter. Those are all areas of connection that pastors can make with fellow clergy, and when we're with people who are involved in the same kind of work that we do, there's a camaraderie and a support that happens that can't happen just when we're in isolation from one another. Yeah. So being together is a critical part of that. Yeah. And then there's just the personal devotional side of our life. Pastors notoriously spend time in Scripture preparing to teach or to preach. That's different from spending time with the Lord devotionally and personally. And so we are constantly encouraging our pastors to take time to be with the Lord on a regular basis, daily, weekly, monthly, taking time away just to go on retreat by themselves and spend time with God. Also encouraging pastors to connect with spiritual directors, which we provide as a service to all of our pastors in the conference and now to their spouses at no charge. And then if need be and actually not just if need be, we think it's really healthy to have a therapist that you can meet with and talk through the issues of life on an ongoing basis. Not necessarily to fix things, just to sustain health and to be healthy on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, I find I was mentioning this to a couple of people. I was talking with somebody about being a pastor. This is my 28th year of being a pastor, and the person said, "That's a long time." And I thought, "That's not a long time." And then about a week later, a teacher was saying that they had been a teacher for 30 years, and I thought in my brain, that's a long time. And then I realized, this has been a long run to be a pastor. And over that time, I've found that a lot of the same things that I struggle with some of the same things, which is really about keeping my mind mentally healthy, being able to work through conflict and what it does to my brain, because it kind of scrambles my brain. Mm-hmm. And I've realized that one of the things that I have to do is to admit to myself this truth: I don't like conflict. And for years and years, I thought that what I needed to do was to be willing to go into conflict, which I think is true. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the willingness to go into conflict means that you can engender conflict. You can create it, whereas maybe you just need to let it go. And then when you are in something that is difficult, to be able to kind of sort through it. And so one of the things that I've really liked about the covenant is I can talk to you. I can call our pastoral care guy in the covenant, Kevin Butcher. I'm going to have a conversation with another fellow pastor tomorrow. And I have a group of other pastors that I talk with that I've been in contact with for about 25 years. And without them, I just feel like I would be kind of lost. You know, and I've really appreciated that the covenant really encourages through clergy clusters to be involved in that. I think, and that's one of the reasons, keep our head clear and keep us going. Yeah.
Well, thanks for your discipline in that, because it is a choice, and the demands of ministry are high. I mean, I think of the hours that I spend and used to spend in pastoral ministry. It's a demanding role. And so adding to that, staying connected with colleagues and peers, making that choice, it's more time spent.
Well, and I think it's funny because you put a positive spin on that. I think that it's because I've drowned once. You know, I've already had the experience of being in a pastoral ministry where I was completely overcome by the feelings of conflict and it creating all sorts of really unhealthy emotional movements in my soul and my mind, and wasn't able to kind of get my mind around it. So once you've kind of gone through that once, you can see it coming up again. And when you do that, then you're able to kind of say to yourself, yeah, I've already been down that road. I've already been, out on that surf. I'm not going to do that again. And so these things that we talk about, the clergy cluster, midwinter, the retreat, I mean, I'm religious about them because I don't want to go down that other road, and I've just found them to be very helpful. It doesn't remove the challenges of ministry, though.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the challenges just keep washing up on shore pretty much every week. Not every day, though.
Right.
Most days are filled with joy and ministry, and then you have the day that is a little bit of a challenge. And it could be a ministry day, but it could be some sort of mental challenge that you face. And I just want to make sure that I don't have day after day of that, but a day, a week, or every other week that I can handle.
Yeah.
And but the other thing just becomes kind of overwhelming.
I was listening to a podcast by Pete Scazzaro, being interviewed some days ago now. He made a very interesting observation that, in our role as pastors, there are times when we have to have hard conversations. And it's not usually of our own initiative. It's something that needs to be addressed because of something that happened or an interaction that took place among some other people, but there's a time for a hard conversation. And he said that conversation, it's our job to address the situation, but it also takes a toll on our soul, our psyche, our emotions, and we need to rest after we've had one of those difficult interactions. And he made the point that we can only handle one or two of those at most a day.
Yeah.
And if we have two of them, that's all we're doing that day. I mean, if you go from one to the next, it's going to kill you. And to have that all happen in one day, we need to plan better around that. And but to plan some time for recovery and restoration, to go for a walk in the woods like we did earlier today. Just take that time and go be with God and let your heart and your soul settle.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things I've learned too is that the difficulties that people are facing, they face the same difficulties we do, but if you have a church of our size, you can have a number of those interactions, and that may be the only difficulty that person has that year.
Right.
But they come and talk to you about it, and it's a difficulty for you that day. And then it just so happens that another person has their once a year conflict, and they come and they talk with you. And you do have to manage it. Sometimes you can be blindsided, but I have been able to see on my calendar, you can kind of tell when something's going to come up and it's going to be weighty. And then it is really smart to only do that one thing, or after that one thing, to just admit to yourself, hey, that was really, really wearing, and I need to be at my best, not just for this person, but for the next person, right? So, I think that's really great.
Can I add one more?
Go ahead,
Just one more component to the care piece. Something that I'm increasingly aware of is that our lay leaders, the leaders of our churches, the elected leaders of our churches, they experience the stress of pastoral ministry in some measure like we do.
Right.
They really care deeply about their church, and when there are challenges or struggles, and when there's conflict, they own this. They're the ones that feel responsible, because they are responsible,
right?
To address it or to see that it is addressed. And I've become increasingly aware of the toll that this last 6 years has taken on our lay leaders as well. And I've been making the effort to also reach out to primarily our church chairs, because they lead their team of leaders in the church, just to check in and correspond with them at a minimum, but in many cases having phone conversations with them, because I know of some of the turmoil that they've had to address.
Yeah.
And that's been very fulfilling, But it's also a recognition, I think, for pastors to say, well, our lay leaders are struggling too. And through COVID, none of us have been at our best. And so the potential for heightened conflict and more issues to arise, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's be gracious with one another.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah.
Which is actually maybe a good segue into that second part of the question about caring for churches. So in order to care for churches, one of the components is caring for pastors, and as we just said, caring for our lay leaders. But when you start talking about caring for churches, it has a more umbrella approach, or it has something, an overarching thing. So when you think about that, what would be the things that sort of come up that you would see a red flag or a yellow flag, like, oh, I need to really go and talk with this church or help this church because something X is happening?
Sure, right. Well, one of the indicators that a church may be entering a season of challenge or difficulty, if they've been consistently contributing to the conference, to our shared ministry, and that drops off for some reason, that would be potentially a yellow flag. Sometimes it's just, oh, we forgot to send a check in, you know. But if they've been consistent in their support, or there's been a steady decline in contributions to the conference, that would be a visible way that we could. But we can also hear about that through interactions with lay leaders when they come to an event like our conference annual meeting, and we just have conversation around the table, and someone says, yeah, you know, our church we used to be a church of whatever, and now we're a church of this, usually around numbers, but it could be a description of ministries. We're not doing that anymore, or we've been tailing off here. We may get stories like that tell us that maybe the church is being challenged missionally. Normally what happens is a pastor or a lay leader or a leadership team would reach out to a member of our conference staff and say, you know, we're hitting some headwinds, we're challenged ourselves financially, or we've had a steady decline in attendance. What are the resources that the conference might have to come alongside us? And so years ago, we developed a congregational vitality ministry. In fact, our current president, John Wenrick, denominational president, initiated that with us and became the first director of our congregational vitality ministries. That formed kind of the very intentional ministry that we had for a number of years. That's been undergoing a revision in the last couple of years, kind of revisiting that and giving it new life and new focus, so that we are equipped and prepared to come alongside churches. So in that kind of broader global sense of care for the church, the institution of the church, when a church recognizes that they're hitting some headwinds, we're able to come alongside them with these tools for congregational vitality. And you know, right now the vitality ministry they've been piloting some workshops for churches and some new tools for churches, and we're just starting to beta test those now and getting ready to make them available to our churches across the conference. So that's one way of caring for the mission of a church. In the midst of that, there's all the personal relationships that happen, of interpersonal conversations and caring for the individuals that we're in conversation with about the mission of the church and the practicalities of their ministry. So we communicate care on a personal basis, but we provide resources to care for the church as an institution. Yeah. Another dimension of our care for the local church is when a pastoral transition takes place. And so if a lead pastor decides that God has either prompted him or her to retire or to transition to a new call someplace else, that sets up a situation where they enter into a time of interim, we call it, when a senior pastor leaves to the time a new lead pastor is called. And this would be true of staff positions too, but my role is primarily focused on the lead pastor position. We do assist churches in their searches for staff members, but it's usually the lead pastor where there's a significant amount of interaction between the superintendent and a local church. And so we coach through that process, preparing the church for their search process and give them best practice recommendations, and they form the search committee, and then we superintendents oversee that role. And it usually is a time of great interaction, both with the elected leadership team of the church, a council or a leadership team, and also with the members of the search committee itself. And that's a point at which a lot of interpersonal relationships occur, because I'm actively engaged with the committee as they prepare for the search, and then we have interaction as the search goes on.
Yeah.
So there's quite a bit of interaction, usually over a 6 to 9 month time period, sometimes longer than that.
Yeah.
But so that's another place where significant care for the local church occurs.
Well, as an overview of the Great Lakes Conference, I think we have 75 churches, 3 church planting works in process. We have 3 camps. Nearest one to us is Portage Lake Bible Camp. Covenant Living is nearby, Covenant Ability on our own site, and I'm sure I'm missing some other things. Those are some really great things, and I'm just wondering if you could share some of the things you really are excited about that are going on in the conference, the Great Lake Conference.
Yeah. Well, one of the initiatives of the conference that I have felt really good about, really since I think we started 7 years ago, is an emphasis on the high priority of evangelism in and through the local church. And years ago, in partnership with the Make and Deepen Disciples ministry of the Covenant, we launched an initiative in which we have cohorts of pastors being trained and equipped for evangelism, fruitful evangelism in the local church. And we have just sustained that. We were a pilot conference. They tried it out on the Great Lakes Conference, and so we got to have pastors go through the pilot program, no cost. That was great. And then they did a follow-up as we tweaked it, and that was also considered a pilot. So we had a good number of pastors go through it, but we have sustained that ministry so that we have had cohorts almost every year. Yeah. And they're usually small groups, 4, 5, 6 pastors, 7 pastors that go through it at a given time. But that's been, because it's such an integral part of our life in ministry, to sustain that has been really life-giving for me. And the people that have owned that, we have a couple of pastors who are helping to see that happen on a regular basis. Tim Heinzelman and Jesse Slimmick have invested a lot of time in that. And so that's been really wonderful. Yeah. I also have felt really grateful for the willingness of our pastors and a number of our lay leaders also to engage in the conversation around race and the pursuit of racial righteousness. We have in our conference a number of churches that are intentionally multi-ethnic that have been doing really good work together at the local church level. But with the heightened tensions around racism in the last several years, we've had conversations with people, invited them into group experiences together where we could have conversation about race, and just been really moved by the depth of the concern and the willingness to learn and to grow together in that. And a good number of our clergy have been part of an anti-racism cohort experience over the last couple of years. That's been challenging and very uplifting and encouraging to our pastors. And so I'm really grateful for that. Have really appreciated the work of our camp directors in this season of COVID. Right at the onset of COVID, there was genuine concern about the possibility of conference centers and camps possibly closing because they're so dependent on the fees that come in for registration for week-long summer experiences, weekend retreats during the academic year. And without that revenue stream, what do you do? Donations, contributions?
Yeah, I don't know what we would do without Portage Lake Bible Camp. They're
It's
such a significant
our
part
camps
of our
are
ministry.
so vital to the ministry of our churches. Both evangelism and discipleship take place in that context. the experience of just being on retreat in one of our camps is so life-giving for people. It would be devastating if that were to happen. God showed up. God provided.
Yeah.
God cared. Our directors really adapted well to the needs of the moment. We had donors that stepped up, that were willing to come alongside, churches that were willing to come alongside, and so we've made it through to this point where things are opening up. We're able to have summer ministries. We had camps this past summer. We had day camp at Mission Meadows and weekly camps up at Porters Lake Bible Camp. And then at our Covenant Mountain Mission down in Virginia, which is a camp that's owned by a local church, but we consider it part of the family. It's not really a ministry of the conference, but it's in our conference, and it's certainly one that we encourage and support. Ministry to the children and families of Appalachia was so critical during COVID, and Joe and Tammy Falconberry, the directors, just a phenomenal job. Yeah. And I could say, if there's an inclination to send a ministry team there at some point for Forest Park, it would be a great opportunity. Okay. A domestic mission.
All right.
And there's great need and great opportunity, and just about anybody can serve, and they do it intergenerationally. So
in West Virginia.
It's in Virginia. It's in the eastern end of, the western end of the state of Virginia.
Yeah. That sounds great. Well, I know that you're going to be, and I'm just letting people know you're going to be coming and preaching. I think it's on November 14th, and we're really looking forward to that. You'll be in our Gifted to Give sermon series, which is on Ephesians, and we look forward to you bringing a message to us. I wonder, as we just sort of close up here, if there's any sort of last things that you'd like to say that we maybe haven't had a chance to say.
Well, I do want to say thanks to Forest Park Covenant Church for the, I'll say, incredible generosity to the conference. Forest Park is one of our strongest sustaining churches in the Great Lakes region. And without the support and the encouragement that's come from this congregation, we'd be a hurting conference. So really, really grateful for that partnership, and excited for the future of the church. Looking forward to being here with you on that Sunday in November, and anxious to see what God is going to do as you continue to strive to be faithful to Him in the months and years ahead.
Yeah. Well, our pastoral staff is very grateful for you, Garth, and I'm personally very grateful for you. I wouldn't be in the Covenant Church without you, and our interactions together regularly are very helpful for me. And just your blessing not only to our staff here, but also to the conference. And we'll be praying for you.
Thank you.
And we just thank you for being with us here today.
Thanks, Ken. Great to be with you.